Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, March 27th, 2024, and today we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And as we do each week on the Midweek Roundup, we take our questions of the day from our newsletter that comes out on Monday mornings. For those of you who aren't aware, we do a newsletter at SMIE Consulting called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. In case you're wondering, SMIE stands for Social Media and International Education Consulting. That's the job. That's the business I started back in 2014, 10 years now as of actually this coming Monday will be 10 years in business as SMIE Consulting. So we're coming up an important landmark. But we've had this newsletter for the last 6 years as a way to provide our hot takes on some of the important social media stories and international education stories, not only in the US, but globally, that can impact what we do here in the United States in our profession. So that newsletter comes in 2 forms. Either an email version, which you can get to by subscribing on our website, smieconsulting.org, and I've dropped the link to that site in the chat on our major social platforms here, so you can take a look at that if you'd like to subscribe, and put a dropped link to this week's edition of that newsletter in the chat as well. For those of you who might prefer LinkedIn as your main go-to source for our news on our profession, I'm dropping the newsletter version or the LinkedIn version of that newsletter in the chat as well. Between the 2 editions, the email and the LinkedIn version, we have well over 1,700, almost 1,800 subscribers now. So in our profession, international ed is a niche field, maybe 10, 15,000 people in the world are regularly considered international educators that attend conferences globally. And to have 1,500 of you, 1,800 of you almost, is a real honor for me that so many people in our profession are digesting this news each week. So thanks again for subscribing if you haven't already. And for those who aren't aware, we do in addition to the live versions of the Midweek Roundup that we do here on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter for our SMIE Consulting feeds, we also have an audio-only podcast version that some of you may be listening to. Thank you for subscribing. We've got over 3,200 folks who have downloaded our Roundup over the past 5 years that we've been doing this. So really appreciate you consuming the audio-only version of this live event as well. So let's get right to our questions of the day. And for those of you who have been following what we do at SMIE Consulting for a while, you know that we developed back during the pandemic something called the 6 Ps of Strategic International Enrollment Management. And these 6 Ps reflect really what I think are the guiding principles and our main philosophies of how we should be looking at international students and their journey from prospective student through to successful alumni as one continuous process that all offices on campus need to be involved in and be on the same page on in terms of knowing what our international students go through. And one of those P's that we talk about is something called peers. And that's the 5th P. Peers are the students, or it might be the 6th P. Let's see. Yeah, but I have to say it is the 6th P. It's the 6th, but perhaps the most important P. And that's it's something that we talk about when we talk about what peers mean in an international student context. These are their peers who are already in the United States studying at our colleges and universities. And what we're talking about here, the question is, what value do international student testimonials have? And this goes right to the heart of the peers, P of the 6 Ps, and how important that is to provide your future students the opportunity to hear from, whether live, recorded, in text, in emails, in social, wherever it may be, hear from their peers who are on your campus now living the dream that they now have, that these future students have of studying in the United States, potentially studying on your campus. So the value of these international student testimonials, it is absolute. There is no more vital tool in an international student admissions or recruiting office than to have that kind of content that you can leverage throughout the enrollment process, that provide opportunities for future students to engage with your prospective students, with your current students, so that they can see a slice of what life is like for them and what some of the outcomes might be for them if they choose to attend your institution. We've done something at UNLV this past winter, spring. We finally established an international or a global student ambassador group of 12 students representing most of our major destination source markets for students on campus that are undergraduate, graduates, male, female, that are serving two roles, really. Some of them are tasked primarily with a peer mentorship role with our current international students, something that is so very vital, that your senior students be helping your newer junior students get acclimated, feel comfortable, have a peer that they can talk to while they're enrolled on your campus. So that peer piece continues through, not just in the recruitment process, but in the current student life process. But here we're talking about these testimonials that you can have that help you recruit your future students. And what we've done with our global ambassadors, student ambassadors, we have half of them that are primarily peer mentors for current students, and another half that are going to be serving primarily as representatives for prospective students to engage with in various forms. Part of what we've done is we've recorded videos of each of these 6 global student ambassadors that are both in English and in their native language. And obviously we try and get a cross-section of the top languages that we have represented on campus to be part of that, because we don't have certainly any video native language content that we can use for future students. So having that kind of content is really gold, and it will have life for some years to come, and certainly one that we will look to add to year on year. But the value of having these is something that I think we really can't underestimate, because when you can connect potentially a student in the same country on your campus with a future student in that student's country of origin, that is a bond that can really help make a connection between a future student and a current student, and more importantly, your institution, because that's ideally what you want. You want your institution to be reflected well. So the videos that we're capturing, these testimonials of why they chose UNLV, why they are, what they found most surprising about life on our campus, some of the best things, hidden gems about studying in the United States that they've experienced being on our campus. So capturing that content, having it available in English, having it available in their native language, really helps expand our ability to reach future students. Now, how we implement that, that's where the rubber hits the road. We have the content. Now we need to have a plan to get that out to our prospective students in consistent, reliable, and informative ways. So that is the challenge that we all face. Now, I bring this up in relation to a resource that I was directed to, something that I've actually been subscribed to for over a year now, and that is the PI News started something called Tales from the Departure Lounge. And this is really meant for international educators to hear from others in the field about their travel stories, about some of their reasons for getting into the field, for those that travel regularly abroad, some of the pitfalls or learning experiences they've had. But what they've done recently, there's a series of 5 I'm calling them testimonials, but they're podcasts with these 5 students that are really, I think, really vital to get a sense on what that looks like. And there, one student's at Oxford, another is a refugee, and there's 2 or 3 others that are important providing different aspects of the student experience. So I would recommend, I dropped the link to the Tales from the Departure site, subscription site, so you can listen to each of these on demand. You can subscribe on the variety of platforms that's available, whatever you choose. But they have some really interesting stories to tell that this is the kind of thing, though obviously the audience for us in these podcasts are us as international educators, talking through their experiences and really providing some kind of food for thought as we go through how we treat international students, as services we do or do not provide for them during their time on our campuses. So I really think this is some good kind of food for thought for us as international educators on the front lines, dealing with future students and their expectations through the lens of what your current students are experiencing. And I think it's always healthy for us as international educators. We do get a little bit disconnected sometimes from the lives of our students. If you're not directly an international student advisor that works with your current students every day, you're really at a bit of a disadvantage in terms of keeping your finger to the pulse on what's actually happening on campus and some of the key issues that they're facing and ways that you can really get in front of some of these. So it's that these kind of testimonials, these kind of focus groups that you should be having as well to capture that information on what is working, what is not working. This can be done as exit interviews for students who are graduating. It can be done post-orientation to capture students' enthusiasm while they're still fresh and excited about being on campus. It can come in a variety of different ways, but this is capturing that information on how you're doing and then potentially identifying opportunities and students in the process that you can turn around and say, hey, would you like to help us recruit the next generation of international students coming to our campus? So these testimonials, the processes and outcomes and fruit of these that you can capture if done well are truly game changers for institutions when you see that the kind of the impact that connections between future and current students from the same country, from the same major, in the same language group. Those kind of opportunities are ones that we need to be providing more of to our future students in our communication flows, in our any of our materials, in our online content. All of that needs to be fresh with that current student experience, if at all possible. And in as much as you can, making that an effort and a priority in terms of where you spend your money, really. In terms of yes, you have to recruit and you have to have presence on different platforms, but the kinds of content you include on those platforms and you include in your recruitment materials, you include on your social sites, has to be student focused. Not only student focused in terms of where your messaging is directed, but student focused in terms of what that content is actually about, current students and their experiences, and how important that is in the process. So that's all we have for you on first question of the day. Second is, should we be concerned with the record visa denials we're experiencing for students looking to come to the United States? And this is a topic that kind of gets swept under the carpet a bit, and it does so because we're really talking in the United States these days about, hey, we're nearly back to pre-pandemic levels in terms of total international students, and we will likely hit that this fall based on all the projections I've seen from all the surveys and the positive responses on applicants and from Common App and other tangential sources. U.S. is certainly on an upward swing. We're in a position now globally where other countries, governments are significantly restricting international student access to their markets through a variety of different means. In Canada, in the UK, and Australia, our three biggest competitors are all restricting international student access now, whether it's by caps, whether it's by creations of genuine student tests as they have in Australia now, or the elimination of the allowing dependents of master's degree students to come with to their studies. All of that and potentially a threat to the graduate route in the UK, Canada's cap. All of these things are governments working against the international ed interests of the institutions there. So are we in the United States immune to potential bad news? Obviously, no. We know back in 2016 when President Trump was elected, there was almost immediately, even before he was elected, there was a huge swell of anxiety in our profession, particularly in the U.S., with what his America First agenda meant for immigrants to the United States, including international students. We saw day after the inauguration, we saw or day of the inauguration, he announced all these travel bans to 7 Muslim majority countries, and the legality of those was later overturned. The PR impact was an absolute disaster in terms of the impact for not just those 7 countries, which collectively, other than Iran, don't send a ton of students to the United States, and Venezuela don't send a lot of students to the United States. Outside of those, there was implications in the rest of the Muslim world that hey, America's closed to us now, kind of like where we were post 9/11, but for very different reasons. So what we're seeing now, this question on should we be concerned with the record number of visa denials, it's pretty significant. I remember back in the day when I worked at Education USA, getting concrete data on student visa denial rates or acceptance rates from the State Department was like pulling teeth. They never like to go to that level of detail. What we generally saw is anywhere from I think a peak of about 86% was the visa approval rate globally, but I think the average was about 80% in my time there when I worked at EdUSA from 2008 to 2014. But what I've seen certainly is we're looking now that we're at about 64% of student visa applicants in 2023 were denied visas. 64% approval rate, 36% denial rate. So that's a significant decrease in the number of approved visas, percentage-wise, in the last decade. I think 80% was where I was where it was when I left in 2014. So in the last 10 years, we've seen a decline from about 80% down to about 64%. So it's a drop of 14% in the approval rates of international student visas. So what we're seeing, though the numbers overall, the net numbers of students coming is increasing, the number of students being denied is quite significant. In fact, last year there was a record 250,000 international students that were denied visas globally. Can you imagine what another 250,000 would do to our international student population? In the United States, we would be well above our records pre-pandemic. So in fact, I'm looking at this article from the Cato Institute that documents this, and it confirms what I was remembering. That about in 2014, it was about 85% visa approval rate. So it's even worse than I thought it was. The drop is even more significant in the last 10 years, down to 36%, 15% denial rate in 2014, which means 85% approval rate, and down to 36% up to a 36% denial rate, meaning 64% have been approved. So those are significant numbers on both fronts, both in the overall number, 250,000 students being denied visas last year, and the percentage that have been approved. We hear from our Australian colleagues that the visa denial rates have gone through the roof there, doubled in the last year or two, but that they're going from 90% down to 85% or something like that. So it's a much smaller percentage overall in terms of the numbers. So we're looking quite significantly in terms of these jumps. And so what are some of the causes for that? Obviously, the State Department never releases those whys, and typically it's 214B is the denial, blanket denial that's given to almost all international students who don't get visas, and that it means they haven't met the non-immigrant intent classification that is one of the three main pillars of why students, the three main pillars that students need to prove before they can get a visa: that they are a legitimate student, that they can pay for their studies, and that they are planning to return home. Those are the three things that every international student, when they apply for a student visa, have to document. So what does that mean in terms of the financial impact? That 253,000 plus students that were denied visas, they would have paid roughly $30,000 a year, about $7.6 billion per year in tuition revenue and living expenses. and over 4 years that rises to $30.4 billion, according to this Cato Institute article. So, though it's immigrant intent is the key, that's why they're denied. We'll never know the details, but they don't. The State Department does not publish these denial rates by nationality in 2022 or 2023. But the numbers from China certainly is the most important trend line for that. We've seen the number of Chinese students coming to the United States has fallen dramatically, but we've seen upticks again in the last couple of years of interest back up, but certainly not back to their peak of 2015, where they were well over 250,000, almost 300,000 in the U.S. then from China. So some really fascinating data in this Cato Institute article. Definitely recommend everybody checking that out and finding out more about some of a little bit behind the scenes as to what's going on with the visa denial rates. Now, our last question of the day is one that we've seen popping up across Europe, and not just in Europe, but around the world, frankly. And it has to do with developed nations. And when I say developed nations, I'm talking about the Western world, U.S., all the major destination markets we're talking about, U.S., U.K., Canada. Most all of Europe is in the developed world. Most of East Asia, including Japan, Korea, Taiwan, are in the developed world. We can put China and India perhaps in there, but maybe not. But other major markets in Singapore, other major Western nations that have what used to be first world countries now are developed world countries. So the question is, in Europe and some of these East Asian countries, we've seen huge upswings in developed nations turning towards international students by national policy, turning towards these international students to help fill domestic shortfalls in terms of the population, working age population. Because birth rates have been declining across Europe, for certainly Western Europe and Central Europe for decades. In East Asia, Japan has the oldest population on the planet. Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, also lower birth rates, declining birth rates. So these countries have had some skills gaps, worker gaps that they've had to fill. And they're filling them with, by policy decisions, but with proposals and policies that are targeted to give international students an opportunity to stay and work longer term and have pathways to residency and maybe eventually citizenship. So these are significant in signposts for a lot of nations around the world that might be facing similar challenges. The two that I'll be putting in the chat are from Denmark and from Germany, but each of these would be worthwhile taking a look at, just to get a sense of what other countries like the U.S., like Canada, like Australia, have been doing for, at least Canada and Australia have been making their pathways to work and residency for students very clear. They have this phenomenon in Australia called the two-step migrant, that's of these students that are really planning to emigrate and work, but using the education route. And even though they have master's degrees already, they're looking for the short, quick, easy way in, and they come into vocational programs that they're well overqualified for as a pathway, a quicker pathway and cheaper pathway into residency and work, or work and residency. Canada has historically had huge domestic declines in population and has been a hub for a government policy that is attracting international student talent from around the world. They've kind of been forced to go backwards a little bit because they overstretched in a lot of ways, and that has had negative impacts on their communities outside the universities and colleges. But these developed nations, Denmark and Germany, are highlighted in the two articles that I'm sharing. But we've seen over the last month to 3 months, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, all change government policy to make it more attractive to international students as bait for them to attract them to come and stay to study, but then also stay to work after they're done with their degrees. And those policies are becoming much more common. And we've seen with Germany, they are doing it specifically, and the head of DAAD in Germany has made it clear in the article that I've just shared that this is a priority because we are facing these shortage. We need these students who are coming to our nation's institutions from abroad to stay. And the German DAAD executive director, in fact, says, hey, we're focusing on India because just the numbers there and doing things, all that they can to attract those Indian students to come to Germany. And now Indian students are the #1 international student group represented at its institutions in Germany. So these developed nations are doing this on purpose, with having national policies really be focused on attracting international students, not only to study, but as we've seen in many countries around the world, and we know how hypersensitive the Indian market is to those post-study work opportunities. It's almost, in some countries, it's beyond just the work. It's the pathway to residency that is an important piece. Though it exists in theory for international students coming to the United States, it's a very complicated process, but it's one that they can't say that they want to do because of the way the visa process is set up in the United States. So we really have an opportunity to reach out through our lawmakers who many of which know that, hey, companies need the talent. There's not enough of the domestic talent in particularly STEM fields to fill the needs of the careers and jobs that they have open in their companies. So we need policies that better align with work policies, visa policies that better align with attracting those and keeping those top talents that study at our universities for the jobs. Our companies, many of which are tech companies, startup companies, entrepreneurial companies that have these amazing ideas that just need the best talent to really drive home the success of those businesses and create more jobs in the process. So that's why these developed nations now in many parts of the world are turning towards international students as future workers, and making it a part of how they promote their higher education institutions, tying those institutions to potential jobs afterwards, and how vital that is. We don't do a good enough job of that here in the United States, because in part it's because our government policies are not set up to allow for a streamlined process. We're the only major Western power destination market that requires that interview for international students, that requires them to prove non-immigrant intent. Even though they're coming to study in other countries, they have a legal pathway, and it's actually promoted as such, a legal pathway to residency after they're done studying, after they're done working. So this is something we need to catch up with the rest of the world on. Otherwise, we will increasingly lose ground. And having government policies that recognize the value of these international students. And all we have to do is look at the southern border right now, where people are just streaming across the border, no controls, just claiming asylum, and just causing havoc with our communities along the border and those that move to the larger safe harbor cities and states around the country. They're having devastating economic consequences on the rest of the country. But we're making our international students and the best and the brightest that come here to study and work, we're making it increasingly harder for them to find those legal pathways to stay, even though we should be courting them and rolling out the red carpet for them. But we're doing the exact opposite. We're rolling out the red carpet for people we don't know their intentions, all of them coming to the United States. We know there are a lot of nefarious folks organized by their cartels and their coyotes that bring people across the border in the across the southern border, and even some of the northern border. But we're not doing anything to stop that. But we're doing almost everything we can to not move forward immigration reform that allows for these kind of clearer pathways for students to work post-graduation and into residency eventually and citizenship. That was my experience. My family came to the U.S. in 1974, June 1st, 1974. This coming June will be the 50th anniversary of my family coming to the U.S. from the U.K. I came in as an L2, intra-company transfer dependent. My dad's company in the UK transferred him to the world headquarters of that company in St. Louis, Missouri, where I grew up. And that process for me, back in 1974, we had 6 years on an L visa, 2 3-year sets, much like the H visa today. We then applied for green cards. That was another 6-7 years. I became a citizen 3 weeks before my 18th birthday. And that's how I became a naturalized U.S. citizen. That journey, that took 13 years from the time we entered, and I entered as a L2. I was a student in a kindergarten back then, had a cute British accent for a couple of years, then obviously lost that, but kept the passport. But I became a naturalized U.S. citizen 13 years after I entered the country, initially as a student. It takes longer for international students because finish your degree, 3 years of work if you're in a STEM field, then you get to a H-1B, then you can apply for residency, then you can potentially apply for citizenship. So a much longer time for students who come first as an F student or a J student. So there's a lot that we could be doing in the United States to improve that pipeline and to strengthen our ties with the best and the brightest in the world that choose to come here, who want to stay, to make it easier for them. But that requires a cooperative effort, a collaborative effort across the aisle. And we know that immigration reform bills get bogged down in these massive omnibus bills on Capitol Hill and rarely ever see the light of day for an up and down vote. Even though the elements that we're talking about here, making F1 a dual intent, giving green cards to anyone who graduates with a STEM PhD, all of these things have been proposed over the last 4 or 5 years in omnibus bills, but they never see the light of day because they get bogged down in the politics of it all. And that's a sad reality we face in the U.S. compared to other countries. Well, that's all we have for you today on the Midweek Roundup. Thanks again for being a part of the conversation, and we look forward to chatting with you again in the weeks to come. Cheers.